Hey there, and welcome back to my new player guide series focused on the DLC. So, as before, and as always, this is a 20-minute crash course guide targeted at new players trying the DLC for the first time and looking for tips. This could be someone who just bought the DLC, or this could be someone who just bought the first class edition of the game on the Nintendo Switch. If you are one of those people, welcome to the game. Glad to have you. Here's hopefully some things to get you moving in the right direction. I'm going to be focusing on important generalized topics in less detail rather than some excruciatingly long and hyper-comprehensive guide spanning 2 hours like you might otherwise expect on my channel. The hope here is that it'll be a little more bite-sized, a little more understandable, and compartmentalized for you so that you have some idea what's actually going on, and also so that you're more likely to actually see the whole thing, right? This particular guide will be looking at the Stygian clan in the DLC and how it performs, how I would recommend approaching it, its pros, its cons, where it stands, and why it's good or bad. And that's pretty much it. That said, as a reminder, leave a comment with your ideas for other guides you'd like to see me make. It could be either new player guides like this that are shorter, or it could be longer guides that maybe you want to see something a little more comprehensive. I kind of am going to be doing both. Additionally, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I do really appreciate that stuff. So, we're going to be talking about Stygian. Now, Stygian, alongside Hellhorned, Awoken, and Wormkin, and where are you? Let's see. Stygian alongside Hellhorn, Awoken, and Wormkin, right? Those four clans, I consider them fairly middle of the road in the DLC. It's very hard to estimate which one is stronger than the other. They all have a lot of pros, a lot of cons, and they either succeed or fail for a various number of reasons. So I'm not going to go into too much depth there, but basically I think this clan is fine. You should almost always find a winning line with it, and it's pretty solid. It's really hard to just rate them though, so don't worry too much about it. Stygian's primary advantage though is that it packs the most powerful spell damage package in the game. Compared to all other clans, this clan slams with spells, and you're going to want to be playing those no matter what you're doing. You're going to take a couple of them. They're some of your commons, they're some of your rares, they are some of your other things as well. They're just really strong. So expect to be going into that. I'll talk more about that later. Don't worry too much about it. It's just one of their main advantages. The other thing I'll say about Stygian is that it used to be widely regarded as the strongest clan before the DLC came out. So that said, it also suffered probably the most, okay, second most of all the clans due to the need to take care of a lot of problematic enemies that arose, things like elites in the DLC and so on and so forth. It's generally pretty tough. They've fallen from grace for sure. Most notably, Frostbite lines are suffering a little more due to the Divinity having the Purify buff. You also have enemies that now have spikes or sweep or some other nonsense that punishes your frail backlines, which is really tough. And, while definitely they're no longer the strongest, I don't think they are the weakest by any stretch of the imagination. They are a little tricky, though, and that is going to be something to keep in mind. As always, for these, I will be going over the new DLC unit, Eel Gorgon in this particular case. So for those of you not looking at the screen, it's 2 Ember, 2 Space unit with 5 attack, 3 health. Sounds bad, except let's read the ability. It says, Incant, gain multi-strike 1, Resolve, remove all status effects. As you might imagine from having played the game at all, or maybe if you're new you have no idea, multi-strike is really good. It makes your unit hit multiple times. This thing is also very cheap to upgrade. You're looking to only put in raw stats in this thing. It's an excellent offensive line in Incant builds, where Incant is when you get some trigger when you play a spell on that floor. And this thing being cheap to upgrade with a large stone or just a plus 10, plus 25 or something, it's really good. There's also a lot of infusions that are really powerful on it, such as things like Alpha Fiend or whatever, just things that benefit from hitting the enemies a lot of times, because this thing hits 11 plus times a turn pretty easily. And it's just really good. Now, granted, it also has some neat tricks because it removes status effects. It can remove the Ember Drain from top floor setups. It can remove Ember Drain from Ember Drain builds in general. It can remove all sorts of things. This also includes positive stuff, so be careful. Things like Rage are usually not a good answer on this for scaling because it just removes them. So instead, you're looking for raw numbers. Things like Razor Sharp Edge, things like Steel Enhancer are really good buff cards for it. The thing that really puts this over the edge for me, though, in terms of being an excellent card, is the fact that its essence is so strong. Multi-strike is unsurprisingly very good. I just told you about why it's good. Hitting a million times is strong. And this has the most accessible multi-strike essence of any unit in the game. And because it's just +1 Ember is the only downside, and any clan can take advantage of that. So even if you're not going to go Incant, take this unit and put it into something else, and you'll feel great about it. Make that unit hit more. It's excellent. So I'm a big fan of that in general. I almost always grab it when I'm shown it, just because it's useful somehow. So this unit, excellent. Big boon to Stygian in the DLC, for sure. Now, as with the other guides, we're going to be going over some of the lines that I think are really strong that you should be aware of when thinking about Stygian in the DLC. The first line that I'm going to be hitting on is Incant. So this is really the bread and butter of the clan. Essentially, it boils down to play spell, get value. And since this clan has such a strong spell package that we briefly mentioned, you're going to want to be playing spells. There are a lot of good banner units that benefit from this, and they scale pretty well. It's perfectly functional, is what I want to kind of boil down to there. The other thing that's worth noting, though, is generally speaking, outside of things like Eel Gorgon or Lodestone Totem, it scales pretty slowly. And it scales too slowly to win on its own when you're factoring in the highest difficulty, Covenant 25 with Divinity. You'll probably muscle through Seraph, no problem. But the scaling required to ramp to a point where you win on the Divinity is very high, and you're probably not going to get there, even if you self-infuse your Sirens or do other shenanigans like that. Of course, the rare units kind of bypass this. They're much more strong, or much stronger in general, but it's fine. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to supplement these with spells that do something. Since you're going to be playing spells on their floor anyway, if your spells are things that do 100 damage to enemies, you can complement those early turns with big power swings in the form of attack spells, and those will help out. You're going to be wanting to do that. You'll also be wanting to look for other scaling lines from other clans. Like I said before, Razor Sharp Edge is a good example. It's an incant, but it's also a big damage swing. You like cards like that. Lots of clans have this. Wormkin, Awoken, rage scaling from units or spells in Hellhorned is really good, etc., etc. So definitely be mindful of that. And otherwise, solid lines. Most of the time you're going to be self-infusing them. They also have a really good Incant Armor 2 shop upgrade that's worth keeping in mind. It's one of my favorites because it's an excellent survivability line if you're already going to be incanting on a unit. So yeah, that's pretty much what you're looking for there, and it's very strong. This will get you there if you can kind of line it up. The one other thing I'll mention here, though, is that sometimes you will have starting clans combos that do not pair well with this. It could be Queen's Implings or Dregs. Maybe you don't have enough spells. Always be on the lookout for if Incant actually is going to be a good choice on your run. So I definitely also want to talk about Frostbite here in the clan itself, because I think it got a lot weaker in the DLC for boss killing than it used to be, but it can still win from a few sources. So Cold Channel Solgard, Titan Sentry, the fellow down here, as well as Chillwind Tethys, they all basically are the only sources that matter for heavy Frostbite into a relentless boss. Things like Hoarfrost Effigy fell off a cliff. It may be fine for some cases, but this is extremely bad for the Divinity because you can't stack up Frostbite over multiple turns effectively into the Divinity because it has Purify. Also, general shout out for Flash Freeze. This is an exceptional card in general. I really love it because with a single +10, it does 13 +8 on one turn, which is excellent because that hits 21 damage, and that's enough to kill most backlines. Additionally, even if the enemy has a spell shield, the Frostbite cheats past the spell shield, so you do 8 +7 on 2 floors, which is 15, usually enough to kill those really scary fellows. So the conduits on the Divinity and things like that. It's a really good ping. It's also extremely strong into early game bosses. Things like Talos and Daedalus get slammed by the amount of damage put out by this one Ember spell. Very flexible, very powerful. Strongly recommend taking it. Foregone Power is good for the same reason into those bosses. It just stacks up very quickly in multipliers, so big value. So yeah, you want to also watch out for 140 plus shard Seraph the Chaste because he has Purify as well, and that can be really problematic. It definitely cripples the build up over time. These cards are really strong in general, though. I almost always pick some of them, excepting maybe Glacial Seal and Hoarfrost Effigy are pretty terrible right now. But the other cards all have their uses, so definitely be on the lookout for that. Even in the wake of the DLC, they're good. So. And then now let's talk about spell damage line. I mentioned this a couple times already, but anything that says spell and damage, or if I could spell damage correctly, actually, it's really strong. So your Ice Empire, your Ice Storm, Titan's Gratitude, Helical Crystallis, Ancient Synergy, Crypt Builder, Ice Tornado, these are extremely powerful. And because there are so many of them in the clan, you're almost always guaranteed to see some of them. And this is definitely one of Stygian's most consistent packages overall. Basically, it amounts to just kill everything with spells. And you'll notice that some of these have the attuned keyword. It means that they take magic power 5 times as effectively. This is really good. You put a plus 10 in it and you get 50 damage. Similarly, in the DLC, there are things in the temples called Extreme Stone or, True Stone, which gives 10 in piercing or 30 at magic power. And those are big value adds for these spells. An Ice Storm that is doing a piercing 11 per hit or a flat 31 per hit is incredible. So really powerful overall. You can augment these with spell weakness as always. Things like Urchin Spines are really good. Energy Siphon is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. And then, maybe Handheld Totem if you're really desperate on Tethys, but yeah. The only thing to be mindful of here is the Divinity has spell shield waves. So you'll want some way of either piercing those waves with piercing on the spell itself, or a dummy AoE spell like a Glimmer to just rip off that spell shield so you can open up with your big spells. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I think is really important for the DLC on Stygian is just disabling enemies, right? So I'm going to talk about Sap and Dazed, but there are a couple spells that I want to hit on first. So Frenzied Swarm, Siren Song are exceptional cards for, knocking enemies out, dazing the Divinity so that it can't swing on you. It's one of the best ways of keeping the Divinity from killing your frail backlines, keeping your guys safe. And Frenzied Swarm as an uncommon is just straight up one of the strongest spells in the game. It has immediate synergy with offering cards by discarding your whole hand. It only costs 1, and it applies daze to the enemy units. It won't solve Relentless because it's only 1 dazed, but it will solve waves as long as your units actually do damage. Very good. The other side of the disabling line is Sap in general. Now I'm going to uncheck Spell because there is a unit that does this in a really big way as well. Lodestone Totem. Any of these can be really effective means at disabling enemies. Drain, Guardian's Amulet, Lodestone Totem, or Spike of the Stygian, just to essentially make your enemies do no damage. You can make them do no damage and then send them to the pyre with things like Siren Song, and then they don't even hit you and it's fine. Or you can just ignore them. If they don't hit you and then they don't hit your pyre and they die to the pyre, that's totally fine. So I think these cards are really powerful, and you should be looking for them on your Stygian runs to protect your units. Almost definitely. Just generally really good. The next part about this that I want to hit on is that, just like with Awoken, this clan does have sweepers. Now, sweepers, just like with Awoken, you put Quick, you put Multi-Strike on your sweep unit, you give it some survivability, you scale it with some mechanism, and this can be really strong. The Divinity combat goes wide in general, so you're going to have more enemies to hit with, a static amount of HP, and you should be able to address them. Now, these are the weakest sweepers in game as far as stats go. They have low damage, they have middling health, and their abilities are essentially pointless into the Divinity, like low Frostbite or spell weakness, but you're playing on top floor anyway, usually. So there's not a lot of value in those abilities. So they're not as good as the Awoken sweepers, but they still say the word sweep, and sometimes that's really all you need. So truly, you can get away with murder on some of these units by just playing big buffs into them. It's really strong. The only thing you should watch out for, as with Awoken, is you want to have some way to address the big mini bosses on the Divinity, because those dudes go really tall and have way more HP than you're going to be able to scale in time on these frail otherwise low damage units. So a good answer for that is literally in clan. I just talked about it, spell damage. Something like Ancient Synergy is just going to slam those dudes for 100. If you've got spell weakness on them already, even better. You can just kill them off that way. So really good stuff overall. There's not much else I need to say as far as strategies go, but I do want to hit on some other things that we're bringing back from request by some of the viewers of the previous guides. I want to briefly talk through the banner units that really exist in the clan and hit on the ones that matter. So there's not a great way of sorting for them here, but basically I'll just talk through them. We already hit on the 2 sweepers. I think they're very solid in general. They're good for quick sweep activities. The 2 sirens down here, Nameless Siren and Siren of the Sea, are your bread and butter for incant lines that you want to kill enemies with. Nameless Siren uses Rage to scale a little faster. It's a little bit scary into Chase Seraph because it purges, but this does scale attack twice as strongly as Siren of the Sea. Usually you treat these basically the same in most runs. You would give Nameless Siren some survivability infusion or an incant armor 2, whereas Siren of the Sea has innate health scaling, so you can just give her more multi-strike or something. Both of them essentially function similarly, and their essences essentially represent half of their own ability, so if you see one of them, you can probably pull off an incant line. The next 2 that I want to hit on are Sharks, though. Guard of the Unnamed is a good frontline tank and can't gain armor 3. A really solid frontline when you need it. Just a lot of survivability. You give this incant armor 2 upgrades, and this thing can put out 7 armor on an incant, which is huge. If you're casting 7 spells a turn, that's 42 free HP every turn. Turns out that's really good. Titan Sentry is also probably my favorite unit in this clan. I think a lot of players sleep on him a little bit, but he's really strong because he takes different upgrades than the others. You're not looking for multi-strike or quick. You're looking for endless and plus 25, which makes your steel shops in general a little stronger. I recommend going that route if you ever can. And this guy puts out a ton of damage when you self-infuse him because he gets his own ability back. He can actually destroy heavies and destroy bosses. And it's really satisfying and really powerful. Really excellent supporting line for the clan. I really think this unit is probably best in clan as far as uncommons go. So those are the banner units, pretty solid otherwise. We'll jump over real quick and just briefly talk through their relics. There are a few standouts here. Obviously, if we're talking about incants, things that make your spells more powerful are good. Forgotten Name is fine, it just adds spell power. It usually represents more than Tempered Talisman, which is just plus 3, so it's okay. I don't think this is excellent, it's middling. Cuddlebeard, I just talked about Titan Sentry. Cuddlebeard makes Frostbite lines exceptional, so good. It's just a plus 2 stacks whenever you apply them, and they never decay. So good. A really big fan of this. I pretty much will always take this if I have even the smallest amount of Frostbite in my run. And then Founding Seal exists. This makes your incant line scale really fast. If you see this and you have an incant line, you win the game. It's just over. Not much else to say there. Icicle Fracture I'll briefly touch on with Titan's Claws. They freeze cards in your hand at the end of turn and then make them free. They're fine. I find myself skipping them more often than not unless I really desperately need to hit something and can somehow line it up, but it's okay. Kinstone Totem can sometimes enable infinites. It's not bad. I don't think it's excellent, though. It's okay. It's good with foregone power, though. I wouldn't sleep on it. You can sometimes generate Ember and then use it for other things, but you have to be careful with random discards because, it'll discard the cards you wanted to play with Kinstone Totem's Ember. Rules of Containment is basically Jackstrips, but a little better. It has a little bit of synergy. It's pretty low impact, but I sometimes take it to good effect. Sigiled Seaweed, I want to give special call out. It got a lot better in the DLC because most enemies that are elite upgraded by the DLC have abilities, and most of them are really punishing. Being able to silence enemies, huge value. 50% is totally valid here. We're going to talk about Tethys Scales and Totem Fragment together. These are great spell weakness sources. They just make your spells hit harder. I love them. They're really good onto anything. Totem Fragment has carried many a run for me. I think it's one of the strongest relics in clan, truly. And then Token of Trader is also here. It's kind of like Jackstrips, but worse. It's fine. Early game, I might consider it. It has some immediate value, but it falls off a cliff pretty quickly otherwise. So those are the relics. Overall, pretty good set. I don't think they're outstanding in general. There are good high rolls, some ones that you say, oh, wow, I saw them, excellent. But there's nothing that really you need to go fishing too hard for. Sometimes you do, though. There's no reason not to. So All right, let's hop over now to the champions. I want to at least give them the time of day before we wrap up here. So we'll start by saying Tethys is terrible. She's so bad in the DLC. So her stats, as you can see, you have 12 HP, 9 HP, 6 HP. She just dies to pretty much anything. You can very rarely play top floor Divinity simply because the sweep, even at 100 shards, auto kills her on two of her paths. Two of her best paths, truly. And the other side of it is the sweep path suffers because she just kills herself on the first spikes wave. So, never really great. She's really bad in general. Now, that said, I think Chillwind, if you can keep her alive somehow, represents a lot of value in Relentless. I have found times where I've been forced to take her, and this path, it does work. I spend a lot of my run finding a way to give her immediate HP or, cheating her out later in the run or something. But she is a relentless killing machine if you can somehow get her to stay alive, is basically it. So I wouldn't sleep on it, but I normally try to avoid it if I have to, because it just makes the run more complex, right? Conduit is probably my go-to pick for Tethys in all cases. It's really strong because it makes you able to play more spells, and you can just take space and play her mid-floor if you have to, but you still suffer from all the same problems of Tethys. Her stats suck. 40 attack, 9 health. This is really bad, even for a one space unit, and yeah, it's tough. You're going to be spending most of your run trying to keep her alive if she matters, or you're just going to throw her away on the Divinity if she doesn't, and the rest of your run will win. So overall, Tethys is sad. I think she brings down Stygian primary quite a bit. So it is what it is, though. You can sometimes pull it off. It's okay. All right, and then Solgard. I think Solgard is interesting. I think he is a really good champion in general, but I want to emphasize that it's not always a good fit for a run. Solgard has Incant on all three of his paths, and this is good because it means you obviously naturally synergize with the clan, but if you have a run with Queen's Implings or Dregs or something, or some weird start that simply doesn't have the ability to incant easily, you may just be locked out of incants in your run, truly. And then he's really bad. You really suffer from that perspective. You have two kind of options here. I think Titan Channel is hands down the best option. It's just a big slap of damage and HP, but he's a tank, whatever. All you have to do is play a fixed number of incants and he activates, which is excellent. Generally, if you see Titan Channel, you should click Titan Channel as my typical recommendation here. Even in runs where you don't have a lot of incants, you can usually get enough to activate him, and then he does a ton of work. Otherwise, Cold Channel is probably the best choice. Obviously a lot better in runs where you can keep him alive or support by killing backlines, make sure he's not taking too much damage because he has low life. But even in the worst case, I take Cold Channel because it's kind of a bad Titan Sentry at worst, which is still pretty decent. So an intrinsic Titan Sentry that costs 0, it's okay. You can kill some waves with it and then it dies and it goes away and your rest of your run takes over. It's fine. So it's fine. I don't love the fact that it's a little bit binary here, but I do think this champion overall is good because it synergizes well with the clan. I would typically avoid Dire Channel as a last resort here. If you have a run where it's great, fine, but my main problem with it is it's essentially a bad nameless siren. You can't give it multi-strike, you can't give it quick, you can't give it an infusion. It's just a bad siren, more or less. And typically you'll just throw it away. And if you're just going to throw away Dire Channel, you may as well grab one of the others and hope it performs better. So I do think he's better than Tethys, but still can be a little awkward at times. I think there are definitely runs where it's a problem. So, and truly, that's all I have to say about Stygian. I think that will wrap up this episode. So I will say I think Stygian is good. It's primarily definitely harder to play than the other clans. Probably the second hardest overall, next to Wormkin, which I think is definitely the hardest clan to play. And it requires forethought, and its vulnerabilities can sneak up on you. I've had a lot of people play runs where they feel really strong early on, they get to ring 7, they cruise up through Seraph, and then the Divinity just absolutely dunks on them. And you need to be careful about that. You need to be planning ahead if you're planning on doing the Divinity at all. And yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing. I think its champions are potentially risky in bad situations for them, but otherwise, it's a really good clan. I'm usually pretty happy to see it, so Yeah, that's all I've got. So hey, thanks a lot for watching this. I really appreciate your time. As always, you can give the video a like or a dislike if you want. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and stay tuned for what's next. Take care, folks.